Former U.S. President Donald Trump was back in a Manhattan courtroom today. It was the second day of jury selection at his historic criminal trial. While leaving the courthouse, Trump repeated his claims that the trial's a witch hunt.
We think we have a very conflicted, highly conflicted judge. He shouldn't be on the case, and he's rushing this trial, and he's doing as much as he can for the Democrats. This is a Biden-inspired witch hunt, and it should end.
This trial centers on an alleged hush money payment that he made to adult film star Stormy Daniels. 12 jurors and 6 alternates are needed. 7 jury members were chosen today, but not before the judge warned Trump against jury intimidation after he was heard talking toward a prospective juror. Chris Reyes has more from outside that courthouse.
Another full day of jury selection in the criminal case against Donald Trump in the state of New York. In the courtroom, one potential juror after another answered an exhaustive questionnaire from the judge and faced follow-up questions from lawyers on both sides. More than a few were once again dismissed because they admitted they couldn't promise to be impartial or unbiased. Outside the courthouse, we talked to one potential juror who was dismissed because of her work schedule.
It was a little bit surreal. I mean, to see... To be that close to a former president, someone who has been on the news, in the public eye so much, I wish I could have stayed for the entire trial. It's fascinating. It's unprecedented.
Trump is facing felony charges of falsifying business records in connection with hush money payment made to 3 different people, including the adult film star Stormy Daniels. He could face jail time. Outside the courtroom, Trump maintained his innocence.
I was paying a lawyer and marked it down as a legal expense. Some accountant, I didn't know, marked it down as a legal expense. That's exactly what it was. And you get indicted over that?
During the proceedings, lawyers on both sides reminded the potential jurors that their job will be to consider only the evidence and facts presented in the case.
You got a sense that people were really trying to put anything that they had brought to this aside and step in and do their civic duty.
Once the jury is selected and sworn in, opening statements are next. This trial is expected to last 2 months. Chris Reyes, CBC News, New York.
My next guest says that choosing jurors for this trial could be a challenge because of social media and how it might reflect jurors' partiality. Amy Lee Copeland is a criminal defense attorney and former federal prosecutor. She joins me now from Savannah, Georgia. Amy Lee, thanks so much for joining us.
Good evening, Sarah. Thank you for having me tonight.
So there's 7 jurors that have been selected so far. Donald Trump, a very polarizing figure. It's hard to imagine, I think, almost anyone in the United States not certainly knowing who he is and probably having an opinion on him, especially because he held the highest office for 4 years. How much of a challenge is finding someone who's impartial here?
Not as much as I thought it was going to be, Sarah. Yeah. The first pool of 96 jurors came in. They started about noon on yesterday after attending to some court business the judge and the attorneys did. And by today, we have 7 jurors sitting on a jury. They need 12 and possibly 6 alternates. They're calling in 96 jurors on Thursday morning. Wednesday's a day off. And the judge says if this continues at the same rate, they plan to start trial on Monday. What you do when you select jurors is that you don't have to have a juror who has no familiarity with the defendant or with the facts. You just have to have jurors that can be fair and impartial. And a number of jurors said they couldn't be fair and impartial, but they have found 7 that have survived the strike process. And so they're over halfway there to seating a jury.
Yeah, I want to talk about that strike process because that's how it works. Either side has a certain number that they can strike and say no to in terms of that juror. When it comes to such a high-profile case, especially this one, what do you think the prosecutors and Trump's team are looking for when it comes to approving or, as you say, striking or dismissing a juror?
Sure. A number of jurors were struck for cause. These were the jurors who came in, the potential jurors that came in and said, you know, I just can't be fair in this trial. I've made up my mind. I just can't do it. Those were struck because the defense and the prosecution didn't have to use one of their 10 sort of at-will strikes, the peremptory strikes. Really, though, when you strike a jury, Sarah, you're not trying to select the perfect juror. What you're trying to do is deselect jurors that could hurt your case. I have read reporting that the Trump team wants younger men. They want people who work blue-collar jobs, whereas the prosecution would like higher educated people. But really, they are just trying to keep folks off that they think will hurt their case. And so today, they have 7 jurors, and both are about halfway through these peremptory strikes that they can use.
So in becoming a possible juror, they have to answer 42 questions. There's a questionnaire for the potential jurors. It's meant to establish impartiality. What do you think that looks like to a lawyer? What might those questions they're answering be?
They're interesting questions. They ask one thing, how do you get your news? Because you can tell a lot about how people think when you see what the news source is. So that's one of the questions they've been asking. Have you ever been to a pro-Trump or anti-Trump rally? Do you have, sometimes they ask about bumper stickers, or they ask about if you've read any books that Donald Trump has written. And so from this, you can kind of get a sense of, like I said, how the jurors consume news, what their work schedules look like, because it talks about that, what their religious beliefs are, to the extent do they have problems sitting in judgment of someone else. And that kind of gives the lawyer a template after they get the answers in court to those 42 questions. Each side has about 15 or 20 minutes to then question jurors and try to figure out, like I said, who they want off the jury, who they think will hurt their case the most.
So as you say, this is going quite quickly in terms of they now already have 7 jurors. How fast might this go? And once they have those jurors, you'll be watching closely, we all will. Map it out for us.
Yeah, so the judge, like I said today that if it goes this quickly for the rest of the week, and he's told the 7 jurors to come back Monday, because if they have the rest of the jury, they're going forward on Monday. And the trial itself is going to be a really interesting mix of documents and what I think is pretty salacious testimony. The defense got a win on Monday before the jurors came in. The judge ruled that showing the actual Access Hollywood tape, the one where the former president told a Hollywood host that you should grab women by their genitals, that tape itself couldn't be played in front of the jury, that was just too prejudicial. But what the jurors are going to hear about are email exchanges between the Trump campaign and trying to suppress this information and trying to catch and kill, they call it, stories about the involvement with Stormy Daniels, the alleged affair with a 1986 Playmate of the Year, and then what turned out to be a false story that a woman had an illegitimate child with Trump. And I thought it was interesting, too, Sarah, that the judge started his comments to jurors stressing that this was in its own way an election interference case, because falsifying documents is typically a misdemeanor under New York law, unless it was done in connection with trying to commit or conceal another crime. And here, one of his state election laws interfering with an election. And then the other ones, of course, are federal campaign laws that Michael Cohen has a limit of $2,700 in campaign contributions he can make, yet he paid $130,000 to Stormy Daniels. And then when Mr. Trump was president, the Trump organization, at his direction, it's alleged, concealed the nature of that payment on its books. So it's sort of a mix of very salacious testimony and a mix of corporate records.
And stuff we've heard before, but I haven't heard in such a long time. Amy Lee Copeland, thank you so much for this. Amy Lee Copeland, a criminal defense attorney and former federal prosecutor. Appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you, Sarah. Good evening.